number 10, we have an abandoned hospital that Hitler stayed in. Check out Beatlitz Hallstatten Hospital in Berlin. Located 30 kilometers outside Berlin, the huge hospital has been used as a place to treat tuberculosis, as well as transforming into a military hospital in both the world wars. In 1916, Adolf Hitler was admitted to the hospital after being wounded in the Battle of the Somme. Later in World War II, it was exclusively used to treat Nazis. Now, a lot of people have been nursed back to health here, which is pretty concerning if you think about it, because it's not a place that I'd really want to spend where Nazis regained their life. I don't know. They say that the walls absorb history. Well, there's some pretty intense history that could have been absorbed into these walls. The hospital is vast too, seriously huge. While it is abandoned, it has been used as a film set on a couple of occasions. For example, it was used in the 2012 movie The Pianist. Coming in at number 9, we have Denbigh Asylum. Denbigh Asylum is a former psychiatric institute in North Wales. Now, over 1,500 patients were lobotomised on the grounds between 1848 and 1995. Not only that, Welsh MP George Maitland-Lloyd took his life in the asylum in 1949. Urban explorer and filmmaker Lee Riley shot an incredible piece of footage on a DJI Phantom 4 drone flying over the old abandoned building. It's kind of hauntingly beautiful. Lee also ventured inside and took some photos of the crumbling building. Talking about his urban exploration, Lee said the building just sits there. He said it's weird to see how nature is just taking over. It's sad in some ways, but I feel proud to be one of the few people to see the places in their current state. Coming into number 8, we have Britain's largest lunatic asylum. Hellingly Hospital has been abandoned for 18 years. Sitting in the Sussex countryside near the village of Hellingly, the building has fallen into disrepair. Now, the main hall has a theatre-like vibe with some spooky high ceilings. Some of the old equipment is still in the building too, like this patient's chair for example. I can imagine someone laying in that chair while a doctor prodded and poked them with utensils. The fact that the chair can still be found in the building is pretty chilling. Coming in at number 7, this next hospital is also in Berlin and is rumoured to be haunted by zombies. This hospital was also a children's hospital, which makes things even creepier. The facility was called Kinderkrankenhaus, which to the English tongue makes it seem even scarier. These days the building in the woods has been battered by the elements and ransacked by vandals. Urban legend in the nearby town is that the old abandoned hospital is home to a number of zombies waiting to strike. Those who dare visit the location have taken some terrifying pictures of the interior and exterior. On the flip side though, some of the graffiti is pretty cool. Coming into number 6, we have Kings Park Psychiatric Hospital in New York City. Kings Park is on Long Island and it opened in the late 1800s. At the time it opened its doors as an asylum, it was the largest state-funded mental institute. The facility came complete with railroads to bring in supplies. The facility expanded and eventually suffered from overcrowding in the 1950s. By the mid-1990s, it had run out of money and was closed down. While people can explore portions of the grounds, the buildings are kept away from the public eye. Now that hasn't stopped urban explorers gaining a glimpse though, and I have to say it looks really terrifying. Like most scary abandoned hospitals, it's surrounded by woodland, and I can just imagine patients running through the trees trying to escape. YouTube channel Vocative made a whole video about this place and you should check it out. Also, here are a few pictures from the inside. I think the paintings on the wall are especially scary. I'm not talking about the graffiti, I'm talking about the kind of absurdist ones at the back. Like, what is going on there? Another New York asylum up next, we have the Willard Asylum for the Chronically Insane at number 5. This is one of the creepiest places on earth. Operating from 1800 until 1995, rumours circulated that once people were admitted here, they would never be leaving. The average stay of a patient here was 30 years, which is actually longer than most life sentences, so that's pretty intense. It's also said that the people who died in the asylum were buried in nameless graves in the hospital grounds. As the hospital was closing down in 1995, an employee found 400 old suitcases stowed away in the loft, clearly packed away as if the person was never going to leave. The cases contained personal items and letters from family members, which is really sad if you think about how the patients weren't allowed to keep them. Some contained old photographs, which are really haunting to look at when you know that these people were admitted to the hospital and never allowed to leave. This is really scary because several murders took place in this hospital. We have the Gabler Children's Center at Metropolitan State Hospital in Waltham, Massachusetts. This children's center was not a nice place to be. In a book written by Dina Williams columns on the topic of abandoned insane asylums, she reveals how the center was once amid a scandal of accidental poisoning. On top of that, the location has garnered the nickname of the Hospital of Seven Teeth due to a nasty murder in the 1970s. A patient named Anna Marie Davey was pounced upon and murdered by a fellow patient, a deranged man named Melvin Wilson. When police finally investigated him, they found that he had chopped up her body and hidden it in 3 separate graves. It seems that Wilson kept 3 of her teeth as a souvenir. The hospital closed in 1992. While some parts of it have been demolished, some scary abandoned buildings still remain, concealing the dark history. So, what is scarier than a creepy abandoned hospital? A creepy abandoned mortuary, basically a hospital for the dead at number 3. This is absolutely disgusting. Memorial Mound in Kentucky was left abandoned for 18 years with corpses left to rot inside. Caskets were disintegrating and bodies left in blue plastic bags. Weirdly, coffins were elevated off the ground and found left decomposing. Gross. Embalming liquids still remain in their tubs too, which is really weird. Some of the interior walls and fabrics appear to be moulding, which is also gross. The site was closed down in the year 2000 and was left abandoned since. Now the buildings, bodies and all, were rediscovered in 2014 and are now for sale. But I've got to ask, who on earth would want to buy this building? It is horrifying and more than likely totally haunted. What is worse than a creepy abandoned dead person hospital? A creepy abandoned mental asylum riddled with ghosts. Give number 2 your best smile is the Say Ying Pun Psychiatric Hospital in Hong Kong. This hospital was the sole asylum in Hong Kong between 1947 and 1961. The building was later abandoned in the 1970s, however it seems a number of ghostly spirits were left behind. Supernatural spirit hunters have reported mysterious footsteps and sounds of a woman wailing. Worst of all though, some people who have been unlucky enough to be in the building at night have reported visions of an evil man bursting into flames, whilst other reports seeing decapitated ghosts just stalking the halls at night. The most scary and haunted hospital in the world has also been the spot of many murders and suicides. At number 1 we have King Seat Psychiatric Hospital in New Zealand. Now this hospital was opened up in 1932 and shut down in 1999. The King Seat Hospital was not a nice place to be when it was opened and seemingly is even worse now it's closed. The maximum security psychiatric unit was very intense and you can still see the bars that were placed on the window as well as the scratch marks in the walls from where patients were clawing to get out. Local legend has it that more nurses died at the facility than patients. Since the hospital's closure in the 90s, several death cases have been reported and investigated as manslaughter or murder amid repeated claims of abuse. Some said that staff even beat several patients to death or just simply let others starve. There have been over 100 ghost sightings in the building, which has been the subject of many paranormal investigations over the years. Many people believe that the hospital is haunted by the Grey Nurse. Others report seeing a number of shadows. Now it might not all be bad. A family that lives nearby has claimed that ghosts play with their children and they're quite friendly. Creepy though. Very creepy.
At number 10 we have Glendale Hospital. Now this hospital was one built in the 30s to help deal with the tuberculosis epidemic. The building was used in other ways as well until its closure in 1982 because of the high levels of asbestos in the building. Today police patrol for trespassers, but that doesn't stop graffiti artists, curious teens, and ghost hunters from exploring the abandoned hospital. One local urban legend is that if you sneak inside the hospital, you will be chased by the ghosts of the patients who passed away in the building. A local resident said, "My friend went there and swears he saw a ghost watching him from the shadows. And after that, he won't go near that place anymore." Also, a group that went in to explore heard whispered responses to their questions through EVP, and they also heard thuds and bells. Lastly, they caught light anomalies on camera, and they said they couldn't really debunk them as being dust or bugs. On to number 9, Old Tool Hospital. This is also known as Asylum 49 because this old home for nursing and other things also is part-time an attraction. Nurses that used to work there claim that 3 different ghosts live there as well. A nurse in white, a man in black, and a little girl. The nurse in white became known when nurses would visit patients who said they had already been visited by a nurse in white already, but there was no nurse that wore white at the nursing home. Next, the man in black was said to be a terrifying apparition that manifested at 3 in the morning. And lastly, there was a little girl that would show up when patients were soon to die. Children's laughter could be heard in the halls, and that tended to be a sign that patients would pass away soon. This pattern of 3 mirrors the rumor that patients died in groups of 3 at the now abandoned hospital. So, while ghost tours are available, be warned. The spirits there are said to scratch visitors or even call out to them by name. Number 8. Seaside Sanatorium. This fortress made of brick was designed in 1934 by architect Cass Gilbert. I mention this because it used Tudor Revival architecture, essentially massive terraces facing the sea that wrap around the main building, aiming to help get children that were there get more sun. As I mentioned before, that was a main method of treatment for TB at one point. Now, once treatments for TB improved, the use of the building changed. After being a sanatorium, it was a home for the elderly, and then a traditional medical hospital, and then lastly, a hospital for intellectually disabled people. Sadly, in its final form, the hospital staff were frequently accused of abusing patients, and the hospital became known for its high mortality rate. It closed in 1996. Now, the abandoned hospital is home to persistent rumors of paranormal activity. Teams that have investigated have caught different EVPs of children's laughter or spirit orb photographs. Some claim to see objects moving of their own accord or swing sets that appear to be in use when no one's on them. On to number 7, the McRaven House. So this one was built way back in 1797 in Mississippi, and the McRaven House has been called a time capsule of the South. There were expansions to the house in 1836 and 1849, but each addition left the initial construction untouched. So this house makes our list because it was a Confederate field hospital during the Civil War, and several residents passed away within the home. The former owner of the residence, John Bob, was murdered just outside the premises, but the most active spirit that haunts the house is said to be Mary Elizabeth Howard. She was originally the lady of the house. She died in 1836 shortly after giving birth in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Her presence is rumored to be behind a bedside lamp in her old room turning on and off, unexpectedly and just any time. Number 6, Rock Haven Sanitarium. This sanitarium opened in the 1920s and was one of the first to try kinder alternatives to the treatments that were given at the time. It was a woman's only asylum during a time when men could plead a woman's insanity during a divorce with little to no evidence. Obviously, a lot of people were sent to different asylums that were using much worse treatments, but those two reasons made this asylum very ahead of its time. So Rock Haven was bought by the city of Glendale in 2008, but it is essentially abandoned. Those who guard or take care of the property have reported unusual encounters though. They say they have seen lights switching on, clocks changing time, figures passing in front of windows, disembodied voices, knocking on the walls, and items appearing out of nowhere. The biggest item that has appeared out of nowhere is, amazingly, a piano. Before then, it was only seen in vintage photographs, but then there. One local historian gives tours of the property every once in a while, and he says that the hauntings are borderline pleasant. Must have been because it was a nicer asylum. Haunted though, nonetheless. On to number 5, St. Ignatius Hospital. The St. Ignatius Hospital operated from 1893 to 1964. It was a private hospital that struggled financially until it closed down. It was sold in 1968 and used as an assisted living facility. It was officially shut down and abandoned in 2000. Today, it is said that the ghosts of the former patients have reclaimed the halls of the hospital. One of the main ghosts is believed to be F.E. Martin, the hospital's first fatality. He unfortunately died after being crushed between 2 railroad cars. People who dare to visit have reported hearing strange growls and being attacked by unseen hands. At number 4, Central State Psychiatric Hospital. So this hospital originally opened in 1842 as Georgia State Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum. It was the first public psychiatric hospital in Georgia. A century after it opened, it swelled to 200 buildings across 2,000 acres. At its peak, it housed up to 13,000 patients. The treatments of the time are appalling. Lobotomies, electroshock therapy, straitjackets, and even children being confined to cages were methods used at the hospital. With the large numbers it housed and the mass graves nearby, it is no wonder that people have had paranormal experiences there. People report voices or strange sightings close to the graves where over 25,000 people are buried. The sightings are typically said to be simple visual anomalies, but golfers from nearby have also reported hearing screams from within the abandoned buildings. Additionally, passerby have felt strange as they come near the buildings with feelings they can't really explain. Number 3, Fairfield Hills State Hospital. This hospital opened in 1931 as a hospital to accommodate the overflow of patients from other nearby mental hospitals. Like other psychiatric hospitals we have talked about, the patients were treated harshly at the time. Until it was closed in 1995, the halls of the hospital were filled with stories of abuse, electroshock therapy, invasive experimental surgeries, suicides, and mysterious deaths. Eyewitnesses claim to have experienced hauntings within the walls. They have seen a dark, shadowy figure rounding corners quickly and have felt like they have eyes watching them. When they go to investigate, the figure had disappeared. Now the hospital is heavily guarded and trespassers are not welcome, so who knows what's going on inside. And number 2 is the Coon Memorial State Hospital. So the history of this hospital starts back in 1830. It was the Vicksburg, Mississippi hospital treating patients mainly diagnosed with smallpox. The hospital also served the wounded during the Civil War. It officially closed its doors in 1989, and although the new owners boarded up the property in the early 90s, trespassers quickly made their way into the buildings. Paranormal investigation groups have reported seeing full body apparitions and shadow figures roaming the building. building. They say you feel the presence of the past patients of the building as well. Many visitors also say they have heard the usual bangs, bumps, and footsteps commonly heard in spirited destinations. It is also known far and wide as a hotspot for paranormal activity, with groups that investigate apparitions and EVPs recorded there. While one group of ghost hunters were exploring the abandoned Coon Memorial State Hospital, they found the body of a missing woman. Lastly, number 1, Oklahoma Tuberculosis Sanatorium. The Eastern Oklahoma Tuberculosis Sanatorium was built in 1921 to care for patients with the disease. It was closed down in 1975 from a declining need for the facility, in part due to the new advancements in treatments. It is believed to be haunted by the spirits of the children who died while being treated. One Native American woman who was admitted to the sanatorium as a teenager lost many of her friends there. She remembers a moment when the janitor there, who also worked as a gravedigger, pointed to her and asked, "When will I be coming to you?" Also, during author Cheryl Pearson's research on the history of the sanatorium, she found out very disturbing information. Native American children used to be tested on for cures to tuberculosis at this hospital, most likely so cures for white children could be found. Those children who were tested on are believed to be the ones who haunt the abandoned ruins to this day.
Starting us off with number 10 is the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Located in West Virginia, the beautiful estate opened up in 1863 and was originally meant to house 250 people, but ended up housing close to 2,500. The asylum was problematic from day one. I mean, it had a separate wing just for black people. Either way, by 1881 it was disastrous. The hospital was infested with patients, rooms meant for one now housed 4 or 5 people, and the farm and dairy couldn't even meet the demand of so many people, and patients soon began to starve and their mental conditions declined. Patients were uncontrollable, they wouldn't listen to the staff. Most wild patients were actually locked up in cages to save space and just save the staff. When investigating the hospital, a reporter found a body cooler open with a body inside. They found patients sleeping on the floor and freezing due to lack of heat. Sanitation was at an all-time low, and by the time the place closed, its cemetery had been expanded to 666 acres to make space for all the dying people. When visitors go there now, they can feel the rage, they can feel the bad energy in the air. The asylum was abandoned and nothing was removed from the inside, so it looks exactly as it did when all this was going on. Ripped wallpaper from the patients, visitors have even seen the wallpaper peeling off in front of their eyes. Screams and howls from different wings of the building, cages rattling like someone was taking their anger out on them. It was a lot. It is a lot. Coming in at number 9 is Old Changi Hospital. Now this one just legit looks like the set of the horror movie from my nightmares. Crumbling corridors, peeling wallpaper. The abandoned hospital located in Singapore was built way back in 1935. It was used for the British ARF, and when they withdrew 7 years later, the Japanese used it as a prison camp for British soldiers and anyone they deemed to be anti-Japanese. It's said the Japanese secret police had their base there and were known to be ruthless. Many prisoners were tortured tirelessly till they died. Some say they used to impale the severed heads of prisoners on stakes and put them out in public. It was bought in 2006 to be turned into a resort, but that fell through. Some say it was because of financial troubles, while others blame it on the hauntings. Visitors have heard screaming on the property and seen shadow people during the night and day. Some have even seen the apparitions of bloody soldiers walking through the hall, and the creepiest one for me by far is the ghost of a little boy that just sits and stares into the distance. A movie was shot in the hospital, and the cast and crew said they heard loud noises and voices and saw a floating woman with a black aura. Groups that go in there tend to have a member disappear, and when they reappear, they all tell the same story. They were following another member away from the group to a desolate part of the hospital when a figure would come and tell them they should never return. Upon exiting the hospital, that member would just disappear completely. I'm getting cringes, I'm getting goosebumps. At number 8 we have Beechworth Asylum. Located in Victoria, Beechworth was surrounded by 106 hectares of farmland, making it self-sufficient for one, but also extremely isolated for two. And it was very, very easy to get put into Beechworth. All it literally took was a signature from a doctor saying you were unstable, and in you went, my friend. If you went in there, chances are you stayed in there till you died. Only a third of the patients actually ended up getting out out. Physicians who worked at the hospital always spoke about brutal treatments, very troubled patients, and no hope of escape for anyone. It opened in 1867, and during its 128 years of being open, around 9,000 patients died on the property. Treatments involved isolation cages, straitjackets, restraint chairs, lobotomies, and electroshock treatments. People who go there have seen the ghost of a young girl who tries to communicate with you in any and all means possible. They've seen the ghost of Nurse Matron Sharp in the halls as well. But the Gravilla wing, where the electroshock therapy took place, is especially creepy. Visitors report feeling icy cold in that area, and that a woman was pushed out of a window in that ward because another patient wanted her cigarettes. People have reported seeing her body on the ground where it fell all those years ago. Others have heard children laughing. One visitor's son was found talking to himself, and when asked who he was talking to, he said James, a little boy that lives at the asylum. Filling our number 7 slot is the Athens Lunatic Asylum. Contrary to popular belief, this one is located in Ohio, not Athens, Greece. It opened its doors in 1874 and housed violent criminals, children, war vets, etc., and performed lobotomies on the daily pretty much. It was known for lobotomies, and that is not a good look, my friend. A lot of employees were trained to do these kind of procedures, but a lot of them weren't. The asylum's first ever patient was a 12-year-old girl with epilepsy who was thought to be possessed by a demon. I'm so glad our mental health knowledge has developed this much that doesn't happen anymore. Like, we can't have that. The asylum itself was beautiful, you know, it had gardens, livestock, a dairy. It was like a retirement home, not a hospital. All patient and staff information was kept strictly under wraps, and it stayed mysterious, like you can't even access any information about who was there unless you file paperwork with the state of Ohio. 1,930 people were buried on the property, but if you thought you could find out their identities that way, you're wrong. Each headstone is simply marked with a number and nothing else. Rumors of staff killing patients were rife because of that, and these rumors weren't helped by the fact that in 1978 a female patient disappeared only to be found dead in an abandoned ward ages later. Even till this day you can see the stain on the ground where her corpse was. I feel like I'm gonna be making this face after every story. Now at number 6 is Taunton State Hospital. This type of hospital was kind of like a self-contained city, and honestly the architecture was gorgeous. It looks like the estate of a very wealthy British man that wears a monocle. It was meant to give patients a chance at occupational therapies, you know, let them have fresh air instead of isolating them in dark small rooms. Built in 1854, the psychiatric hospital has a very colourful history. They used to do frontal lobotomies often. In the 1870s, they used to put patients in water tanks and then put them in extreme cold to try and shock them out of their ailment. Later on, electric shock therapy was used on thousands of patients. Jane Toppin, a sociopathic serial killer, was one of its most infamous patients. And if you don't know who Jane is, she confessed to killing at least 31 patients while working as a nurse. Fantastic. And it said staff at the hospital used to conduct satanic rituals in the basement. They used to take patients down there and they were never seen again. Most of the buildings closed down by 1978 and became a mental health facility for convicted juveniles, but 97% of staff said the conditions of the hospital put everyone at risk. They didn't go into what they meant by conditions. Did they mean the decrepitness of it all? Did they mean the hauntings? Staff later came out saying they always felt uneasy on the property, especially if they went near the basement. One was even driving back there at night and saw screaming patients in the windows that weren't there. Coming in at number 5 is Nocton Hall. Located in England, during World War I it was used as a home for wounded American officers, but by World War II it was a military hospital. By 1957 it was open to the general public and closed down around 48 years later. However, things were bad, but not when it was a hospital, when it was a home. It said the ghost of a young girl roams the hall and enjoys being in one bedroom in particular. Staff staying in that room used to get woken up at 4:30 AM every night by a young girl crying by their bed. She would say things like a devilish man had done this to her and other things like that. The story claims the ghost is a servant girl who became pregnant after being with the owner's son, and he then later murdered her. The apparition of a grey lady has also been seen around the hall, but God knows who the hell she is, but she's there. At number 4 is the Ararat Lunatic Asylum. Said to be Australia's most haunted building, this mental institution is the largest abandoned asylum on the continent. It opened its doors in 1867 and 100 people died yearly, whether they were staff, patients, or prisoners. Now you're probably like, what do you mean prisoners? Ararat used to house the most criminally insane, evil people in the country, and it was also a place for people suffering from mental illness. It used to house around 1,000 patients and 500 staff members, and in the 130 years that it was open, there were around 13,000 deaths. These days, the asylum is used for ghost tours, and boy, oh boy, is this place haunted. Visitors have been known to faint unexpectedly, have waves of nausea and pain hit them out of nowhere, and methodical banging sounds can be heard everywhere, and it's most likely the sounds of patients hitting their heads against walls. I mean, the dead patients. But the J ward is where it gets bad. The J ward housed the asylum's most infamous patients like Bill Wallace. Bill shot his friend over a cigarette and then was declared insane. He died there after being held there for 67 years. Another one was Gary Webb, who mutilated himself 70 times and would say nothing but shout, "Get out." When guests go into J ward, they feel like they're being shoved and bitten. The sound of ticking clocks, the desperate shrieking, the shouts of someone saying "get out." It's literally an invite to hell. Get out? Poor, you do not need to tell me twice. You don't even have to tell me once. You won't even find me in there. Filling our number 3 slot is Penhurst State School and Hospital, previously known as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. What a mouthful. The hospital opened its doors in 1908 and housed around 10,000 people and went through 79 years of controversy before officially shutting down. The campus was literally huge. It could have been a mini town on its own. It even had its own railroad. Patients sent there were seen as too unfit for citizenship, and the commission did not want them to intermix their genes with the general population. The hospital's chief physician believed every person in there could have been a potential criminal. The hospital's reputation declined rapidly when many residents came out saying they had been neglected and abused. 9 employees were charged for slapping and beating patients, many wheelchair bound, and forcing patients to assault each other. Patients would have unexplained bruises on them from the staff, and it was horrible. Nowadays, many of the buildings have been torn down, but paranormal activity is rife. Voices, footsteps, screams, abrupt temperature changes, wheelchairs moving on their own, items thrown out of nowhere. It's like the building and the spirits are just working together to show you how bad they used to have it. Audio recordings have picked up on voices saying things like "go away" and "I'll kill you" and "why won't you leave?" Need I say more? I don't think I need to. Now at number 2 is Coon Memorial Hospital. This has to be one of Mississippi's most haunted buildings for sure. The hospital was open for well over a century before being closed down in 1989. When it initially opened, it was for the smallpox outbreak, but later tended to Civil War soldiers, and then later the yellow fever outbreak. Well, we have a lot of outbreaks as a species, don't we? The hospital itself is a maze of rooms and walls. Some are knocked down, most are spray painted. It's just a whole mess. And despite being abandoned pretty much right after it closed, many paranormal teams have been inside and have seen shadow figures climbing up the walls. Yes, up the walls, and not just floating around the hallways, up the walls. Their cameras captured disembodied voices saying "oh my god" and the voice of a little girl saying "want to come play with me?" Why do dead kids always want to play? I don't want to play with you, like leave me alone. The worst discovery happened in 2015 where a group of ghost hunters ventured into the hospital to check it out. You know, adrenaline junkies, I don't know, I don't get it. Now they ended up finding the murdered body of a missing woman near the entrance, but her blood trails indicated she had come from inside. Her body had been dragged from the 2nd floor in the middle of the hospital to a grassy area outside. Most of her blood was found on the steps. I just need a minute to comprehend this. And finally, at number 1 is Gonjiam Hospital. Located in South Korea, it's said to be one of the most haunted buildings in the country. I mean, CNN even called it the freakiest place in the world. The hospital was randomly and abruptly closed in the 1990s, and people only really found out why ages afterwards. They weren't making money, the conditions were beyond unsanitary, there was no proper sewage disposal, and worst of all, a lot of the doctors themselves were mentally ill and the patients were murderous. All in all, it's just not a good mix. The story goes that patients and staff alike would randomly die without cause and would later be found at their desks or in their beds. It said a doctor on the staff was mentally ill and he was the one killing everyone inside. The bad juju they left behind was so bad that visitors who go in there have come out screaming after hearing moans and seeing shadows and being scratched by nails that aren't even there.